Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. Today we will get into another couple really interesting medicinal herbs that are generally regarded as weeds. They're probably growing either in your yard or somewhere near you right now. And what's so great about these medicinal weeds, so-called, is they're free. That's sort of the nature of a weed. It's just a plant growing where somebody doesn't want it. That's basically the only definition of what a weed is. But when we think of the so-called weeds, they tend to be very adaptable. They'll just grow wherever the seed has fallen. They'll grow in poor soil. They don't need a lot of water. They're going to come back every year and spread. And some people call them invasive weeds because of that. But it's really, that's a real misnomer, because a lot of the weeds, so-called, by the agricultural department here in North Carolina, and I checked in other states as well, are actually native plants. They're just plants people have decided they don't want in their yard for no apparent reason that I can find. And a lot of them are really good medicinal herbs. But before we get into that, I like to do a recipe every show from my book, The Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking. And I do believe I've discussed this one a couple of years ago. But something popped up on my YouTube feed, I guess 2 days ago. And y'all know what a big fan I am of Shop and Pan. I mean, he cooks the way my family cooks, just a little more Southern influence from my family. But, my family is Southern and Southern French, at least half of the family. And the other half being a mix of Irish and English, and there's a little Creole and Cajun in there, and there's a lot of different stuff, right? But the foundational elements of the way I learned to cook from my mother and grandmother are very French and also very Southern. And most recipes begin with a roux, and it's just it's a different style of cooking. It's more like you get in Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast of, say, Mississippi and Alabama. And parts of coastal Georgia, actually, and even Charleston, than most of the rest of the South. I mean, most all of North Carolina was Scots-Irish and English and German, and most all of Virginia was English. Settlers, predominantly. Tennessee, a lot of Scots-Irish, and same with Kentucky, and really anywhere inland in South Carolina and Georgia, North Georgia, you're going to find that same mix of English, Scots-Irish, some Germans. A lot of Germans did settle in upstate South Carolina, and they were called Dutch. People said they were Deutscht. So people in South Carolina, just like up in like Pennsylvania and such, understood the word Deutsch to mean Dutch. So very different style of cooking. But Jacques Pepin said, just did a, 5-6 minute thing on YouTube. Check it out. It's the Jacques Pepin Foundation is what he's doing these short videos under. On bread. And he said, a Frenchman never wastes bread. In the French kitchen, no bread ever goes to waste. And it's an important point because I remember some years ago there was a cooking competition, one of these really big ones over in France, and an American chef was doing really well. I mean, he was really competing very well against all these classically trained French chefs. And he ended up, I think, coming in like second place. I mean, he just about won the thing. And he said maybe now, the French will respect American chefs and American cooking. And the chef next to him said, no, that's not going to happen. And he was shocked, because he just won this cooking competition. He said, why isn't that going to happen? And he said, because you buy croutons. Americans buy croutons. See, that is such a foreign concept to the rest of the world, to Europeans, especially like in France and Germany, where they have, and Italy, where they have this incredible tradition of baking these wonderful breads. The thought that someone wouldn't just take some stale bread and fry it up in a pan with a little olive oil and seasoning and make their own croutons is like so foreign. I mean, that's like the ultimate not understanding what you have. You know nothing about food if you're buying croutons and breadcrumbs. Uh, but one thing he did, which really kind of surprised me, my grandmother always did this. My mother does this. I learned to do this as well. First of all, it's if you can help it, um, don't store your bread in plastic bags. That causes the bread to mold much more quickly than it would otherwise. Now, bread will eventually mold either way. If you need to store it in a bag, use a paper bag. Paper bag can breathe. Okay. The thing is, if you don't store your bread in a plastic bag, it gets stale faster, it gets hard, right? So what my grandmother would do, whether it was a loaf of bread or biscuits, she baked biscuits maybe 3 times a week, right? Big family, and we had a lot of biscuits. Wonderful buttermilk biscuits with lard, just fantastic biscuits. She made a lot of cornbread as well, usually fried though, so that wasn't so much an issue. But when the bread of any kind would become stale, she would just pass it under running water and put it back in the oven for a few minutes. That's it. Jacques Pepin had a baguette that was literally so stale he could barely cut through it, right? Half of it he just cut. He just dipped it in a bowl of water. He said he would normally just run it under the faucet. Put it in about 400, I think he said 400 to 450 degree oven for about 12 to 15 minutes. It came out fresh, soft on the inside, crunchy on the outside, like a fresh baked baguette. Exactly what you want. That's probably a week old. That's probably more than a week old loaf of bread. He took the other half, and I mean, he took a lot of effort to cut it in half, like you would if you were making a sandwich, right? Again, dunked in water, put it in a toaster, pop-up toaster, toasted it, came out, and it was, soft on the inside and crunchy on the outside and ready to be used. He did one of my favorite things, which is to top that piece of bread. You got it nice and crispy, crunchy in the toaster with some sliced tomatoes, olive oil, and a couple of anchovy slices, a little salt and pepper. That's a fantastic meal. If you don't like anchovy, sprinkle on a little grated feta or Parmesan cheese. You're going to absolutely love it with a garden fresh tomato. But if you don't go ahead and eat it right then, you've got about maybe a 30-minute to an hour window after you've revived your bread. It's going to get very hard again, even harder than it was before. That's a really good time. If you know you're not going to be eating this bread in the next hour, cut it into cubes, heat up some olive oil in a pan, toss your cubes of bread in there, fry them in the oil with some salt and pepper, a little garlic, and take them when they're done, put them on a plate and sprinkle some Parmesan cheese over them, and you got fantastic croutons. Otherwise, take them and with the back of a frying pan, just crush everything up into breadcrumbs. If you want seasoned breadcrumbs, take some, your Italian seasoning, your mix of, basil, oregano, etc., and just mix it in there. That's a prepackaged mix of herbs, or you can make your own. You can use herbs de Provence. Never waste a piece of bread. And if it actually does get moldy, as he said, feed it to the birds. There should never be a time when bread goes into your trash can. I absolutely believe in that. Of course, we have on the farm growing up all the bread that wasn't eaten, whether it was cornbread, biscuits, or loaf bread, wheat bread. It was fed to the animals, either the dogs. It would be mixed in with some gravy and some scraps from the kitchen. It would be part of their food, or it would go to the chickens. Never waste a piece of bread. You know, um, if you're a Christian, I mean, you realize the importance of bread in the Bible. I mean, this is literally such a foundational part of life. I mean, bread is the staff of life. We pray, give us this day our daily bread. We don't pray for beef or fish or tomatoes or bell peppers. Bread is literally staff of life. And I think we've really got some screwed up ideas about bread in our culture these days. All this gluten intolerance did not exist a generation or two ago. It's not a matter of people been going around with an allergy to gluten that was not diagnosed. That was a very, very small, I mean, that was like an almost unknown condition until the last 20 years. What it has to do is we have very poor gut health. We have killed off our gut bacteria, our good flora and fungi with antibiotics, far too much overuse of antibiotics. You go to a doctor with a head cold, it's a virus, he gives you an antibiotic. It's not going to do you any good whatsoever. I mean, yeah, he could say, well, it may prevent a sinus infection, but you know what? Um, the American Medical Association is like beg them stop handing out antibiotics like candy, but they do it anyway. We've got chemicals in our water, all kinds of chlorine and chloramine, fluoride, which will also disrupt your gut bacteria, but chloramine is really bad stuff. We've got chemicals in our bottled water, our soft drinks. I mean, everything we get from a store is pasteurized, meaning all that good bacteria and fungi that supports life is stripped from it. We don't eat enough naturally fermented foods like sauerkraut and fermented pickles and all that good stuff. And so people have started having issues. That's half of it, right? The other half is since 1900, the nutritional, whether it's the vitamins to the protein content of wheat, has dropped by over 90%. As they have bred wheats to become more productive, to get more yield off an acre, and especially to be Roundup ready, they've stripped the nutrition from the wheat. Now, we're getting all the gluten and probably actually more gluten in that wheat than before because of the way it's bred. They want that, good chewy gluten to make the bread, but we're getting very little nutrition. Meanwhile, that Roundup ready wheat is so called because they can spray it with Roundup and it will tolerate it. Okay, they would spray the field with Roundup to kill all the weeds, right? Then actually before harvest, they spray it again to desiccate or help dry the wheat. And so when we eat our modern hybrid wheats, we're actually eating chemicals that can kill the flora in our guts. So that is in our intestines, I guess I should say, in our bodies. It's actually in every cell of your body. We're eating herbicides. We're eating pesticides. And now I'm just a layman. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not giving any advice. But a couple generations ago, gluten intolerance barely ever heard of. Now it's like an epidemic, along with diabetes. You know what? Type 2 diabetes didn't even exist 100 years ago. The first man who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes was, I think, Big Diamond Jim, who weighed like 450 pounds. He was sort of a gangster who owned a lot of restaurants in New York, and he just gorged on cakes and pies and sweets from morning till night. First diagnosed case of type 2 diabetes in the United States. We didn't have as much sugar in our diet. Up until a couple generations ago, most kids didn't have asthma. Now, most kids have asthma, even though the air quality is exponentially cleaner than it was in 1900. Why? Well, maybe we might want to look at our diets. And if you're interested in that, check out the Weston A. Price Foundation. I love them. I love their book, Nourishing Traditions. Sally Fallon, who wrote it, actually is a fan of mine. She recommends my Substack newsletter. It's like one of the greatest honors that Sally Fallon would endorse my work. So be sure to check that out. Now, as I said, recipes from my cookbook, Omnivore's Guide, I bake about once a week as needed, single guy. I don't go through that much bread. And because of that, it was difficult for me to keep a traditional sourdough starter. I just can't eat enough bread to keep constantly feeding this starter and actually make it worthwhile. So during COVID, knowing I wouldn't be able to buy yeast because it all disappeared from the store, I wrote this article for the Grow Network. You can find the article on their website. I figured out how to make the last half packet of yeast last forever. And it's just going back to the old method of biga or poolish. It's the exact same way Jacques Pepin describes his grandparents making bread. You bake once a week. You take that, I like to do a no-knead bread. I do need breads for like pizza dough and different things, but just for my simple loaf bread, the was it artisan bread in 5 minutes a day? I kind of adapted their recipe. So if this sounds familiar, it's just my adaptation of their recipe. I use 6.5 cups of King Arthur bread flour. King Arthur flour is non-brominated. It's far healthier flour and easier to digest. A lot of people have said they have gluten issues when they eat bread made with a sourdough starter and quality flour that isn't full of chemicals. Don't seem to have trouble at all, or far less trouble. And people have eaten my bread, even though this is not a typical sourdough starter, have a lot better with. I have a family member, especially, who has some real issues. She can eat my bread, no problem. She eats store-bought bread, big problem. Okay, so 6.5 cup flour, 3 cups warm water. Um, it calls for yeast. I'll get into that in a minute. I actually use that dough starter. And I believe the original recipe called for a tablespoon and a half of salt. I do a tablespoon and 3/4 because I always think that bread that doesn't have enough salt just does not have a good flavor. Okay. Uh, and I don't use any fancy salt. I just use any kind of non-iodized table salt because iodine is an antibiotic and it will kill yeast. So you can use any kind of salt. Just make sure it's plain salt. I don't care if it's Himalayan rock salt or sea salt or just cheap salt from the grocery store as long as it's non-iodized. Now you can get away with using iodized salt, but over time it will weaken your dough starter. That's been my experience. And to that I also add at least a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half of olive oil. The original recipe from the book does not call for olive oil at all. The fat in the olive oil, of course, makes the bread softer and it gives it more of the texture. You get a nice crunchy crust, but the texture of the inside loaf is more like sandwich bread. So I don't end up cutting my gums when I eat it because I hate it when that happens. But if you're going for a like traditional baguette, it's just going to be flour, water, salt, and yeast, right? I've adapted. I do everything to my own taste, and I make this in a loaf pan, and I bake about once a week. But what I do is I have this dough starter. When I had that last pack of yeast, I mixed it in with my flour, water, and salt. I let it rise for a couple of hours. I pulled off a chunk of dough and stuck it in a jar, covered it with cold water, put a lid on it, a jelly jar, no big deal, right? And put it in the fridge. That ball of dough under that water, the cold makes slows down the action of the yeast. It will sit there for a week or two or even a month actually, slowly digesting that flour, the starches in that flour. It will eventually kind of disintegrate and it can just be mixed into a slurry in the water. So whenever I make a loaf of bread, rather than adding yeast, I take my dough starter and I add it to the amount of water. So the recipe calls for 3 cups of water, right? My jar holds about a cup and a half of dough starter. So I put a cup and a half of fresh warm water, or actually hot water in there, and toss in my dough starter. I take about a teaspoon of sugar and mix it in. Make sure it gets all foamy and active. That shows me my yeast is still alive and I don't need to do anything to it. And I just make the recipe like that. Mix it all together so it's a no knead. So just stir it together, make sure there are no dry spots in the dough. Cover it and leave it on the counter for 2 hours. pull out a chunk of dough, put it back in the jar, cover it with water, and stick in the fridge. I've had the same dough starter going for over, I guess, 3, 4 years now. And with every single bake, it gets a richer flavor, more of that sourdough, rich, almost cheesy flavor to it. And it's fantastic. And that keeps, without having to do daily feedings of sourdough starters, I have this wonderful dough starter that I keep in the fridge that I use for my breads and pizza and etc. Rolls, you name it. And just make sure you always take a chunk off and put it back in that jar, cover it with water, and put it in the fridge. And that's it. You'll have fantastic bread that you may find easier to digest. I'm not going to say you will, but you may. And I mean, I make focaccia bread with it. When I do that, I pull out the chunk, of dough, put it in the jar, and then I mix the herbs into the dough, because you don't want the herbs sitting there in your dough starter. You'll never get them out. And actually, a lot of those herbs have antimicrobial properties. They can actually inhibit the yeast from reproducing and being good for you. And, I mean, it's fantastic. I really love good home baked bread or good bread from a serious bakery. And now I make the best bread in the county, and it costs just 50 cents a loaf or something. I mean, even though the cost of flour, I used to be able to get King Arthur flour for like $3.99 a bag. It may have even been cheaper than that at one point. It's now like $5.99 or $6.99 a bag. I broke it down. I'm getting at least 9 loaves of bread or 6 loaves of bread and 3 pizzas out of it. By the way, that recipe for the no-knead bread was for 3 loaves. So after the dough has sat on the counter for a couple of hours, put it in a container. I use just an old pitcher that's got a lid that it will pop open if pressure builds open it, so I don't have to worry about it. You can use whatever you want. Just, make sure it's sealed so the dough doesn't dry out. Pop it in the fridge. After about an hour in the fridge, you're good to take your dough out, pull off a chunk, sprinkle a little flour in there so it's, dry. Pull off a chunk, cut it with a serrated knife, form your loaf, let it rise on the counter for about an hour. Put the rest of the dough back in the fridge. You'll get 2 more loaves out of it, more than likely. Depends on how you portion your dough. You can make 1 really huge loaf of bread, or you can make 3 normal size, or 4 small ones. Just whatever you want to do, right? So it's kind of risen on the counter a little bit for about an hour. I put it in a 425-degree oven. That seems to be right for me. I think the original recipe said 450. Well, actually, before that, here's what I do. I put it in the oven at about 150 for about 15 minutes. So it just gives it a little more rise. Then I pull it out and preheat the oven to 425. Take a sharp knife and cut just a good slice along the top, kind of score the top so it helps the bread rise. When the oven has preheated, I put in no water bath, no anything, no steam. There's plenty of moisture inside that dough, and I don't put it in a cast iron Dutch oven with a lid on it or anything. I just put it in the oven on a baking stone or in a bread pan, and I cook it for 35 minutes at 425. That works for my oven. You probably want to play around with that, go like 30 to 35 minutes, more or less. Adjust the temperature 25 degrees one way or another, and take it out, let it cool, and dig in, because it's really delicious. Really delicious. And there should never, ever be any wasted bread. If you can't eat it fresh, you can wet it and pop it back in the oven or in a toaster oven or a toaster. You can make breadcrumbs, you can make croutons, you can feed it to the chickens or just throw it to the birds. And yeah, I think it's honestly like a sin to waste bread. And besides, what is better than buttered bread and a glass of wine, or some olive oil on bread and a glass of wine with some fresh sliced tomatoes, maybe some mozzarella, olive oil and salt over the mozzarella, a few pieces of basil, maybe. Yeah, that's simple, good, absolutely delicious. Or sop up, put some gravy over the bread, sop up some gravy with it, as we say in the South. Some marinara sauce and some meatballs and some, go for it. Bread is fantastic. It's just, we're not getting good bread these days. We're not getting a lot of good stuff at all because we got too much government and too few small farmers and home cooks. Too many big corporations and too many little guys taking care of their own families and themselves. So let's talk about one of our herbs today. This is Agrostemma githago. You may know it as corn cockle. That's really what it's been called far more often throughout the ages than Agrostemma. But Dioscorides wrote of it as Ira, A-I-R-A. He says, Ira, which grows among wheat, ground up, has the power to remove the edges from nome, also known as grazer disease, which eats away muscle, tissue, and bone. That sounds pretty horrible. Also good for rotten ulcers and gangrene, applied as a poultice with radishes and salt. With natural sulfur and vinegar, it cures the skin disease known as wild lichene and leprosy. So corn cockle, although which is it's somewhat toxic, we're going to get into that for a little bit, was used as a poultice for leprosy. Boiled in wine with pigeon's dung and flaxseed, it dissolves scrofulous tumors, its glandular swellings and goiters, breaks open hard swellings that are hard to ripen. Boiled with honey and water and applied as a poultice, it is good for those with sciatica. The smoke inhaled with polenta, myrrh, saffron, or frankincense helps conception. That's pretty broad there. I frankly don't like to combine my herbs with pigeon dung, to each his own. Actually, it's pretty common. Really, in traditional Chinese medicine, they use a lot of urine in some of their formulas. Probably not in commercial commerce anymore, but that's very traditional. In the ancient, one of the earliest herbals of Western Europe, the physicians of, now I don't pronounce Welsh well, but I think it's something like Midfi. This was the early Welsh medicine before modern times. They had a lot of herbal remedies that were mixed with manure of some kind, dung or manure or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I don't go there. I don't do that, but it is actually quite traditional. As far as the smoke being inhaled with polenta, by which they would mean ground wheat or barley probably, because they didn't have corn, myrrh or frankincense or saffron to help with conception, I don't know of any medical basis for that whatsoever. I mean, I don't. But that's what was believed in ancient Greece at the time. Now, getting into a little more modern, 1930s, Miss Grieve tells us, well, first of all, she describes it. It's an herb in the pink family. It's one of the campions. It's actually a really attractive flower, I've always thought. I don't know why anybody would consider it a weed unless, they just really don't want it growing among their grain, but I certainly wouldn't. It wouldn't bother me to have it in my yard. Pink to purple flowers. I mean, it's really, pretty attractive, actually. She says of its use, she says corn cockle is not used in allopathic medicine today, but according to Hill, if used long enough, it was considered a cure for dropsy and jaundice. It must have some diuretic properties and also help with liver issues. In homeopathy, she says the seeds have been found useful in paralysis and gastritis. In Poland, according to Sophie Hoderick-Snab, corn cockle was used to rid the body of freckles. So it's had a long use to get rid of freckles. I happen to like freckles, so I don't try to get rid of freckles. I think freckles are, well, of course I'm, half Irish. I'm part Scottish as well. We have a fondness for our freckles. Plants for a future states in modern use. Medicinal use of corn cockle. The seed is diuretic, expectorant, and vermifuge, so helps rid the body of excess fluids, helps get rid of congestion from the lungs, and can kill intestinal parasites like worms. Minute amounts are used medicinally. It has a folk use in the treatment of cancer and warts. The plant is not used in allopathic medicine. It has been found efficacious in the treatment of dropsy and jaundice if used for long enough. Some caution is advised. See notes on toxicity. I'll get to that in just a second. A homeopathic remedy is made from the seeds that has been found useful in the treatment of paralysis and gastritis. So, for a few hundred years, it seems to have been found useful, and people have found it useful in the same ways in different parts of the world. Now, as far as the notes, although poisonous, the saponins in this plant are poorly absorbed by the human body, and so most pass through without harm. Saponins are quite bitter and can be found in many common foods, such as some beans. That's true. Some beans, by the way, you really shouldn't eat raw. They can be a little toxic, even though they tend to be common beans in our diet, by the way. But because those saponins are not easily absorbed by the body, they don't usually make us sick. They can be removed by carefully leaching the seed in running water. Thorough cooking and perhaps changing the cooking water once will also normally remove most of them. Well, think about how we usually prepare dry beans. We either soak them overnight or do a fast soak, which is, in boiling water, pour it off and go again, right? However, it is not advisable to eat large quantities of food that contain saponins. Saponins are much more toxic to some creatures, such as fish, and hunting tribes have traditionally put large quantities of them in streams and lakes, etc., to stupefy or kill the fish. Many, many plants can be used in that way, all of which are illegal, but good to know in a survival situation. Peterson Field Guide to Medicinal Plants says, minute amounts of the powdered seeds were once taken in honey as a diuretic, expectorant, vermifuge, or dewormer as they call it, used for jaundice, dropsy, and gastritis, European folk use for cancers, warts, hard swellings in the uterus. Warning, the seeds are toxic, especially when broken. Dangerous saponins are concentrated in the seed embryo. So if you stay away from the seed embryo, you might be a little bit safer with this herb. Physician's Desk reference for herbal medicine states, the drug exhibits an antimycotic effect. Cornflower seeds are toxic in higher dosages, and under unproven uses, folk medicine use includes gastritis, coughs, skin impurities, edema, and worm purging. So, there you have it. I just gave you about 2,500 years of medicinal use for a very useful and attractive flower that we try to eradicate as a weed, which is a shame. We need to respect our weeds. And next week I'm going to get into one of probably my favorite of all the so-called weeds, the wild alliums. I am a ramps fanatic. I also love wild garlic, wild onions. I love all alliums, and it's going to be a big one, so I will save that for next week. But y'all, this all comes from my book, The Medicinal Herbs and Weeds of the American Southeast. These weeds probably grow everywhere in the continental United States except in a desert area and well up into Canada and down into Mexico. Weeds are incredibly adaptive. And last time I guess I mentioned the book, I got in a bad review. Someone said there are no pictures in it. And I'm like, yeah, duh. I said that in the description. This is not a plant ID book. This is about uses. Get yourself a good field guide. Get a good phone app. But, the person put out a bad review and it killed my book sales. I mean, like really bad because it was the only review I had on Amazon. Thank you to all of you who heard that and went on there and left a good review. There are now, I guess, 4 reviews, 3 of which are 5-star reviews and very positive. Well, one may have been a 4-star, but that's good. I mean, the guy had given me a 2-star review and a negative comment. And the comments are really nice. I really appreciate it. Immediately, as soon as there were a couple of good reviews on there, this book started selling a couple of copies. So y'all, I appreciate that so much. And I also want to say thank you to all of you who have bought my spoons. If you heard the show maybe a month ago, I announced, I do a lot of wood carving. I especially like to carve useful items for the kitchen. So spoons and butter knives, jam spreaders, cheese boards, charcuterie boards, bread boards, bowls, plates, cups. I like to carve wood. I love to spend time in the woods, so anything that gives me a chance to be out in the woods and then, I'll find a nice piece of green wood, a storm-damaged tree, cut it, bring it back to the house, sit on the front porch, grab a couple of knives and gouges and just start carving. I do things the way people have done for thousands of years, and it's kind of become somewhat of an art for me. I really enjoy it. So I set up an online store. It's judsoncarrollwoodcraft.substack.com, and didn't know what was going to happen. Uh, People, y'all been buying my stuff. I mean, and really a lot of praise. People have been saying it's really pretty. They can't believe how, useful and durable. The designs are really good. They feel really comfortable in the hand and in the mouth. And it's great. I mean, I just started doing this about a month ago, and I mean, I've had 5 sales, and that's really pretty amazing for handcrafted, uh, artisan made, one item at a time stuff. Uh, it's not like I can't turn out more than a piece or two a week. So when I sold 5 in the course of about 2 weeks, I'm I'm really pleased. I really appreciate y'all. And if you haven't checked it out yet, if you're a subscriber to the Substack newsletter for Southern Appalachian Herbs, I include a link to it. But if you're hearing this and you're not on my Substack, go ahead and sign up for it. It's free, and you won't have to look for the show every week. It'll pop up in your inbox every Monday. But if you haven't seen my woodworks yet, it is judsoncarrollwoodcraft.substack.com. And I got a lot of pictures. You'll see some of the items I've sold and a commission piece. A lady wanted me to make a salt bowl for her. I did it in sort of a Scandinavian style where the bowl looks like a bird. Check it out. And if you got any questions or you want to give me feedback on that, or if you got an idea you'd like to think something you might like to have me make for you, my prices are actually really low compared to everybody else. um, you know how I do things. I like to make things accessible to everybody. But don't forget, the holidays will be coming up, even though it's blazing hot again today. Holidays will be coming up in just a couple of months. So maybe you'll look on there and find something you might like for yourself or for a friend or a family member, a loved one. These are quality handmade heirloom pieces. They will literally last for generations. I use really good hardwoods and I seal them with walnut oil. So with proper care, as long as someone doesn't, throw it in the dishwasher and put it on high heat, that's how you ruin wooden things. With proper care, each of these, whether it's a small spoon, I can make like little spoons, up to very, fairly large items, should last several generations. I mean, hopefully your grandkids, your great grandkids will inherit these items from you someday. And I include a card in there. It's numbered. It says this is, item whatever, and thank you, and the date and everything. So if they ever become collectible, you'll have that. And like I said, I like to carve stuff. I like to make useful items. Other people are like, this is art. This is collectible. And I'm like, wow, this from a guy who flunked every art class he ever took because he couldn't even draw. Uh, but I've always been good with making things with my hands. I inherited that from my grandfather. He was a carpenter, a brick mason, a stone mason, a farmer. Oh, he could do everything. The man could literally do anything. He did his own, he was an electrician, he was a plumber, he was a politician, he was a park ranger. He did historic preservation for the state of North Carolina. He was a justice of the peace. He was, um, he built his own, just before he died, he never got to realize his dream. He built his own living history museum. He bought an old homestead, an old farm that his grandfather had built. And he went in and completely renovated the old farmhouse, the barns, the outbuildings, brought in an old post office, a general store, a tack shop, filled everything with period antiques that he restored, and was going to open a living history museum. And had he not been exposed to a lot of really bad agricultural chemicals as a farmer in the, you know, 40s through 80s, and industrial chemicals when he was working in the shipyards in World War II. He it would have been probably the most significant historic site in eastern North Carolina. I mean, he was literally building a living history museum that would have shown um, I mean, he even got a Wells Fargo armored stagecoach and completely restored it. He got an old buggy a Surrey that belonged to the governor of North Carolina in like the late 1800s, fully restored it. Built all the horse tack to go with it. Went up to Amish country and consulted with them, found out how they did everything, came back and built it all by hand, trained the team to pull the Surrey. Um, what an incredible man he was. If only, I mean, let me tell you how far ahead of his time he was. Uh, First of all, he would have been one of the fathers of permaculture had he ever written about it. He built systems all along the farm so that everything worked together with maximum efficiency and output and self-sufficiency. He built his own nuclear fallout shelter, his own design. He dug, I don't even remember how many feet down, lead line door, by his own design, air filtration, its own water and pump system, its own power source, you name it. He had food storage. I mean, it was incredible. And, the man never even really finished high school. He did some, like, uh, basically, he worked the farm, and my grandmother, who was a few years younger than he, kind of helped him do some schoolwork at night, so it could be turned in under his name, and he'd get a diploma. But he was he understood math, he understood science, he understood engineering. He was a draftsman, he was an architect, he was a you name it. And my grandfather could do it. And certainly the biggest male influence on my life. I'll never be a tenth, a tenth of the man he was. All right, y'all. That wraps up today's show. Have a great week. Thank God there's a cold front moving in. This has been one of the hottest summers I've ever seen. Enjoy this last week of August. We're heading into the last month of summer. Fall will be here in just a couple of weeks now. Thank God. It's been so hot. So anyway, y'all, have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.